Good morning, afternoon, and evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us for another Data Engineers Lunch 84 to be exact. Today we have a special guest, Nick Brackley, and he'll be going over interesting and exciting things that were covered at this year's AWS reInvent. The host for this event, Raul and myself, we are looking for speakers and sponsors for this event. So if you're interested in either opportunity, please reach out to me at the link, at the email address listed below. We are a part of a larger community called Data Community EC. We believe in building an inclusive environment. So no matter your race, gender, or sexual orientation, everyone is welcome, and we expect respect to be given to all. Data Community DC is actually made up of a lot of different groups, generally surrounding data. You can find out more about these groups at the links listed below. So what do we cover here? We cover everything from the ingress and egress of data. If you're new here, please introduce yourself, what you're hoping to learn, how you found out about the community, and anything else you'd like to share with the group. Just go ahead and leave that in the YouTube chat. And group rules, like I mentioned earlier, we want everybody to be respectful and courteous to everyone. We want you to ask questions. This is a community lunch. We want everybody to be engaged. And obviously, we want you to share what you know with us. Here at Anant, we design, build, and manage global real-time data analytics platforms surrounding Cassandra, Spark, and Kafka. We're very familiar here with the data here at Anant. We'd like to thank our program sponsors listed here, also our organizational sponsors listed here as well. And then very quickly, if you have any jobs, meetups, hackathons, conferences, classes, or any other announcement, please go ahead and leave it in the YouTube chat for everyone to see. And then finally, we are hiring here at Anant, full-time and part-time positions. If you're interested in any of these opportunities, or if you'd like to get some more information about them, please visit our career website listed below. And then please visit our events page. We have a lot of events coming up. We have our weekly calls, our Data Engineers Lunch, obviously, on Mondays at noon Eastern, and then our Cassandra Lunch Thursdays at noon. We have two great lunches. We have to come up with another one coming up on Thursday. We hope to see you at both. Check out our events page and add it to your Cassandra, to your calendar, so you don't miss any upcoming events. And then finally, our latest Apache Cassandra runbook is available. We have about a week left on this particular edition, so make sure you download your free copy. I'll be dropping a link in the chat so you can grab access to that. Make sure you do grab that before next week, because I believe we are in that last week. And with that, I'll go ahead and hand it over to our presenter today, Nick. Nick, over to you.
Hello. I hope everyone can hear me all right. My name's Nick Brackley, and I'm here to talk to you today about the AWS reInvent conference. It was a pretty exciting conference. It was my first time attending this particular conference, but not my first conference overall. I'll give you some tips and tricks, a little bit of review, and then summarize some of the really interesting outcomes, some of the interesting events, some of the things I saw, some of the things that really grabbed my attention, and absolutely open to questions throughout the talk. So Akwi is monitoring the YouTube chat. So I will be able to, he'll interrupt me with questions. Absolutely feel free to interrupt me at any point. So let's get started. So again, I am Nick Brackley, an enterprise architect, and the AWS reInvent conference took place from November 28th until December 2nd in Las Vegas, Nevada. It took place in about 8 different casinos, and over the course of 5 days, there were 4 keynotes where higher-ups in the AWS organization presented some of the most important things that they've done in the last year, and the new product release was a really common theme. A lot of productization has happened of for services, and then we'll talk some about the bigger themes as well. So I was there with Anant's CEO, Rahul Singh, and we agreed that the whole conference was about data. Unsurprising for a cloud conference, a huge amount of this conference was about getting data into the cloud and using Amazon's suite of services to essentially access and manipulate that data in different ways. We'll also spend a little while looking at the console, at the AWS console, and at least one of the many consoles associated with AWS, and some of the things that I got a chance to experiment with. So the first thing that really grabbed my attention was AWS EMR. For those of you unfamiliar with the acronym, this is Elastic MapReduce. And AWS EMR is going to be a good entry point into the AWS ecosystem for a lot of people used to developing the open source community. Neil Mukherjee, the head of AWS EMR, essentially said that what they do is they take some of the most common open source tools like Spark, Presto, Kafka, Snowflake, and they take the newest release, they spend 60 days tuning it for AWS, and then they release it onto AWS EMR. So EMR, the source of EMR was to sort of auto-scale EC2 instances, but it's since grown into basically one of the biggest providers of AWS open-sourced tooling and instances that exists. And the benefit is it comes pre-baked in a lot of the languages that you're used to, right? You can code in Python on AWS EMR automatically. So let's take a look at the EMR console. It is as simple as logging into the console and creating your clusters. They also have a good amount of documentation. That's one thing that I was, in general, very impressed at from the AWS perspective, is they have good documentation for the majority of things that they do. We'll also talk later about some of the conference-specific benefits that you can get, workshops and labs that are only available at the conference, and maybe some ways that AWS could improve on those. So EMR is a great entry point into the AWS ecosystem. And one of the things that really caught my attention was the way that EMR works is in those 60 days when AWS is working on tuning these open source tools. So Spark gets released on January 1st. Okay. For January and February, what AWS will do is it will have its teams comb the pull requests, comb the feedback that the most recent release is getting, and they'll work on plugging those holes, on fixing those bugs. They'll also do the same thing with feature requests, going back more than just those 60 days, to essentially make AWS's version of the tool essentially just slightly beyond what the open source community is willing to maintain. I'd say some of the disadvantages, while there is more transparency with EMR than other AWS tools, there's still more opaqueness in these AWS hosted tools than there are in the traditional open source community. And there are all of the challenges that come with that. That means generally, again, they are behind the most current release. There are going to be security risks that that aren't detected in these closed source tools that are detected in open source tools. And just generally, there will probably be fewer templates and do-it-yourself guides in this closed source ecosystem than there are in the truly open source ecosystem. But one of my goals for the next year is I want to dig a lot deeper into AWS EMR, because at Anant, we really prize ourselves on being open source. So I want to take on and cloud agnostic. So I want to take a lot of the learning that I've developed in these open source tools, Spark, Kafka, etc., and convert them into convert this knowledge into Amazon's platform. So those of you that know me know that I've been working on a pretty exciting migration project. AWS has a lot of migration tools, again, because they're focused on once they get your data into AWS, then A, now you have access to all of their services, but B, now it's much, much easier for AWS to convert you into a customer for more services. So they provide a lot of really interesting resources to help move data into their system. There was also this pretty good migration strategies, 7 Rs mnemonic here. These are essentially things that you might have to do to data or applications if you, when you move it from any other source, whether that's on-prem, another cloud, a hybrid cloud. When you move it into AWS, you have to decide what you want to do with all of the data and all of the applications that are going to be managed by AWS, or that are going to be managed on AWS at this point. And this level of effort obviously also associates with a level of cost. In some of the migrations that we've done, we've been fortunate to have a relatively small number of applications. So we are essentially living nice in the middle of level of effort here. We're mostly looking at rehosting and relocating. But as a migration grows more complex, as you look at a more complex enterprise, it might be necessary to sort of take the applications that you have and just completely refactor them, reconfigure them, rewrite them in a more modern code that's going to be more accessible to current engineers and developers. Because as code gets older, it gets the antique effect. Right? It becomes more expensive to work with older code because there are fewer and fewer people that it's relevant for. So one of the really interesting insights that I got about migration on AWS is they consider migration and modernization to be really linked, right? They want to take the opportunity of doing this migration, which requires a detailed inventory of your data and your applications. They want to take that opportunity to modernize those data systems and applications because the process of inventorying and moving this data really gives you insight into what you're using. So a couple of the really good tools that were discussed a fair amount. The most important tool is just the Migration Hub, which you'll see here. This Migration Hub has some free options, but as you can see, they say that there is no charge to use the Migration Hub to collect and store data. That being said, if you want to do much more than the basics, of course, AWS has a paid service for that. One of the things that interested me as well, they had some very interesting planning tools. Some of those, I'm not going to be able to show you one of the most interesting tools because AWS also provides exclusive tools and services to partners and vendors. So there is a migration planning tool that lets you dive down really deep into what you expect the costs of migration to be and what you expect the cost savings to be once you have migrated to AWS. These are the sort of, this is their sort of business case tool, which lets you essentially pitch a migration by generating real numbers and just logging a lot of information about the clusters and the applications that you're using. Some of the other really interesting tools that they have a schema conversion tool, which can let you change the format of your data on the fly. This is something that we're working on at Anant as well. We're working on a Cassandra schema change migration tool. And they also have this data migration fleet advisor, which is probably only going to be applicable for some of the biggest, most complex enterprises. But it essentially is a tool that lets you keep track of the components, the databases, the file systems that need to migrate. And I think that's one area where I was really intrigued to think about the sort of scale of full cloud migrations, right? We are very specialized in Cassandra. We are Cassandra experts. But thinking about migrating file systems, and that was an area where I hadn't personally spent a lot of focus. But obviously, with AWS, you get access to basically everything that they care about. You can do whatever you want on AWS. That's sort of their deal. They want to be the community that you can manage all of your data in. So one thing that was interesting is there was not a lot of discussion about Cassandra in many of the meetings that I was a part of, specifically with AWS. Cassandra was on the lips of a lot of the vendors there. A lot of people were talking about Cassandra in the expo, but the actual AWS services seem to be pretty unfocused on Cassandra, which I think is an interesting opportunity. But I was talking to Rahul about it, and he also said one of the reasons for that is because Cassandra tends to be a destination, right? You get to Cassandra, and then you don't need to do much with your data from that point. So from AWS's perspective, it might not be their favorite tool because it's so effective at doing what it does well that people don't then need to get lots of additional services, which of course is a huge part of Amazon's business model. All right, so I'd like to pause here. We've been over sort of two of the things that I found interesting, two of the AWS pieces that I found really interesting. And if there are any questions in the chat, Akwi, now would be a good time to pull them up.
No questions at this time.
Cool. All right, so let's change gears for a second and talk about the conference itself, because the scale of it surprised me a little bit. So what you see here is just a map of the conference, but the scale is a little hard to grab here. So just to walk from venue 1 up here at the top, the Encore, I spent a lot of time in the Encore and the Win. Just to walk from the Encore to the Win took about 15 minutes. So there are shuttles and buses, but if you are considering going to this conference and you're thinking about, oh, well, how should I plan my day? If you want to go to one session, at the Palazzo, at the Venetian, and then another in 30 minutes down at the MGM Grand, the only way you're going to be able to do that is if you get an Uber. You can't walk that far in that amount of time. You can't be certain that the shuttles that AWS provides are going to get you there in that time. There really is a lot of planning that should go into this. And given that they tend to release the beginning of what the catalog of sessions is going to be in September, and by the time towards mid-November, where I started booking my sessions, the majority of sessions were fully booked. I would say if you want to really optimize your AWS reInvent and manage more than 3 sessions a day, you should really think about trying to book your sessions in October, and you should think about, all right, if I'm going to spend the morning at one casino, then I should try to find 2 or 3 sessions that I can go to at that one casino, and then plan maybe one big change of venue during the course of the day, and then spend another 2 or 3 sessions at the next venue. Just for reference, the most sessions that I was able to attend in a day was 4. Those were 4 sort of 1-hour sessions, and just the process of navigating from one to the next was a challenge, especially at first for my first reInvent. But you'll also spend a fair amount of time having conversations with the people that you meet, the people that you meet standing in line, the people that you meet at lunch. And that's one big selling point for this conference is there were anywhere between 50 and 90,000 people at this conference. That's a little scary when you think about Corona and disease vectors. There were hand washing stations all over the place, but you might be able to hear it in my voice. I got a little sick there myself, and the conference was somewhat lovingly known as Reinfect, but largely it was a great experience where I learned a lot. There were also a couple different types of sessions. I mentioned earlier some of the labs. There were labs where you got access to a specific AWS environment that had been cultivated specifically for whatever was trying to be demoed. The most interesting lab that I took part in pulled satellite data, satellite image data from some wildland areas and did before and after comparisons from the Paradise Valley fire in California in 2018. We were able to do some cool filtering on those images. And just generally, it was a great way to dive pretty deep into what services AWS can offer. This is probably very much by design, but those labs take place on specific accounts that are generated exclusively for the demonstration, for the lab itself. So if you want to get the benefit of bringing home your lab experience with you, bringing home what you did, you either have to take really exceptional notes or recreate the experience on your own personal AWS console, which of course can be a little bit expensive. But it's unfortunate to see the hard work that you put in at a lab disappear, at the end of the conference. So that's something I think where take the lessons that I learned and duplicate the work that you care about on your own personal AWS account. So some of the interesting things about actually being in Las Vegas, the primary way that you navigate from at least the facilities that I was at, I tended to stay focused in the north up here, you're walking through the casino, you're walking down the strip. And there was actually a meeting that ended up getting canceled on Wednesday because, this is a big city. There was a police event that essentially blocked access from any of the north casinos to any of the south casinos by shuttle or by walking. And, if you really had someplace to be, you had to get an Uber and sort of take a route around the city. Vegas remains a crazy place for anybody that's ever been there. And no matter what they say, it does come home with you. So let's go into the next cool thing. This was Werner Vogel's Thursday, keynote, right? This is one number, okay? And just for context, this number, Octillion here, there are 27 zeros associated with one octillion. And this was the biggest, Octillion was the biggest number that I had heard of at this point. There was a neutron star collision, two neutron stars collided, and the supernova that resulted in that produced a large amount of gold. That's one of the primary ways that gold is created in the universe. And the value of the gold created was $26 octillion in 2018 money. So that was 26 followed by 27 zeros. This number is obviously about 100 orders of magnitude bigger than this. So where this number came from, if you take a single molecule of penicillin, there are 41 atoms in penicillin and 285 electrons. So if you want to model even the simplest state for those electrons, let's say there's an electron can either be in an active state or a passive state. So basically you can be at the n=1 energy level or the n=2 energy level, which isn't a terrible approximation. Electrons are obviously able to be in more than one energy state, but the majority of them are going to be in one or two energy states the majority of the time. So this is 2 to the 285, essentially saying each one of those electrons can be in two states. Let's totally map the sort of the way that this molecule of penicillin can exist. This is obviously this number is way beyond the total storage capacity of all of the computers that exist on the Earth at this time. So the way that we're actually able to do simulations with penicillin is we simplify this. We know what's going on with a lot of the electrons. A lot of the electrons are in pretty much one known state. So we reduce this as much as possible so that we aren't dealing with this impossibly big number. That was one of the things that this keynote, which was my favorite, discussed a lot, is the idea of reality mapping, of reality modeling. And we'll see one of the tools that AWS has generated for this. They have a SimSpace tool that essentially is designed to help you simulate the real world. But some of the best sort of partner demos in AWS were associated with companies that are using, pharmaceutical companies that are using modeling like this, modeling of chemicals and of compounds to test hundreds of thousands of molecules, hundreds of thousands of potential drugs on simulated cancer or simulated disease to reduce the amount of time that it takes to generate a drug. And there were some real success stories that came out of the conference, which was pretty exciting for me to hear. So while this number is really big, this data, this huge number, can also be modeled by 285 qubits. So the push into quantum computing is really going to allow better simulation of reality, better simulation of both the micro scale for something like penicillin and the macro scale when you want to monitor and model something like the power grid for 30 million, excuse me, for 200 million homes in the United States, right? With a couple dozen outlets each, all of the connections between those. Those are the scale of things that you're going to be able to start modeling effectively in the next few years, and especially as this revolution in quantum computing happens. So I wanted to talk about the SimSpace tool. Let me see if I can find it here. So, let's get us in here. So this is the AWS console home. And one of the new features that they added is this favorites tool, which lets you add the Amazon services that you use most frequently. So SimSpace Weaver is this tool that they discussed a fair amount. SimSpace Weaver literally lets you create a simulation of the real world. And don't get me wrong, it's relatively expensive to use. But again, when you look at how AWS documents all of these components in a similar way, you're going to be able to simulate some really interesting things. You can create real world environments. I saw a great wildfire simulation using this tool. You can also simulate traffic through a city with this tool. And just the sort of simulated reality is something that I find fairly interesting, but it's a big opportunity for large institutions to be able to use this reality simulation to answer questions that they would usually not be able to answer without significant customer surveys or significant investments in large experiments. So, all right. So I was surprised that they didn't have this before, but the this favorites component can be added just by, you can add these things to your favorites components just by adding a star here. And in order to get access to this favorites bar, all you have to do is come down here and add widgets. This is, again, a relatively new feature. The only widget that's available right now is this favorites bar. So if you had an AWS account that didn't have your favorites yet, you would just be able to add it here by clicking on this add widgets button. Our CEO, Rahul, also strongly recommended sort of getting rid of these things to clear up your console space. Another really interesting thing that came out of the conference for me was the knowledge that this user interface, this AWS console interface, which is used by probably 1 million developers worldwide, is open source. They have open sourced this space. So if you want to develop something that is going to look really similar, have this same set of pane features, you're going to be able to access this open source user interface and put whatever services you need onto your own systems. All right. The next thing that I was pretty excited about was this idea of AWS outposts. This is essentially taking the AWS ecosystem and putting it onto a server rack on premise for you. So to sort of extend this this idea of the cloud, right? AWS has availability zones, which are often referred to as regions in other platforms. And they also, if you want to have data that's guaranteed to be closer than just your own availability zone, they have city-specific cloud regions as well. So if you are living in New York and you need access to your financial data very quickly, you can not just have your data be in AWS East or in East 1, you can have your data be located in New York or if it's even more important that you have your data on-prem, but still backed up to the cloud, so you have access to your data quickly and even during service outages, then you can literally put a cloud outpost into your location. So this is really useful for something like a hospital, which absolutely cannot suffer a service outage under any circumstances, right? They can't lose access to their data that's located in Virginia if they're located in Maryland. I thought this was a pretty interesting feature because my background is in space technology, and I'm always a little hesitant to think about putting all of your services into an area that you're physically separated from, because it becomes unreasonable to think about, having serverless features on your spacecraft that have to beam data back to, have to beam data back to the planets in order to get your outcome. Don't get me wrong, there are use cases where that makes sense in space engineering, but I think this is a pretty exciting development. It's sort of a strange, but to me pretty natural extension of private clouds. All right, so they were also excited to talk about new instance types. A lot of the instance types that were discussed were recommended specifically for machine learning. If you need a machine learning node, they have some that are specifically designed to run just these super fast, relatively complex application or processes over and over. One of the nodes that excited me, this is actually the cool thing about this i4i.metal node is this is relatively standard. It's great for networking. It's great for sort of being the front end, but this is just scaling up a single node to a ridiculous degree. 128 vCPUs, over a terabyte of RAM on a single node. This is just, to me, it's natural that we will continue to push the bounds of what a single machine can do. But I just think about all of the amazing ways that you could, reduce the time spent waiting for, your Blender simulations to filter. This, when you think about clusters, sometimes that scale can get a little bit out of hand. It can be hard to visualize what that means. But to me, it's a lot easier to think about one node and how powerful, the powerful results that you can get out of just a single computer. So again, I said a lot of the really exciting things were about discussions. A lot of discussions had with pretty interesting people and experts in the field. And here were some of the things that everyone agreed on. Terraform was absolutely on everyone's mind. AWS has a competing service, CloudFormation, but I heard one mention of CloudFormation in the wild versus literally everyone was talking about using Terraform for their infrastructure as code. Congratulations, HashiCorp, you are winning this battle, which is hard to do against AWS. So AWS has managed to integrate Terraform into some of their products, sort of admitting a little bit of defeat there. But Terraform is great. Everyone loves it. Everyone is using it. A little bit less so with Ansible. There was not universal acclaim for Ansible, but Terraform was pretty much universally loved and universally used. To the extent that there's now an ecosystem of services surrounding Terraform, like OpenFaaS and TerraGrunt. These are some services that we'll see a little later on. There are even some cool open source services surrounding the Terraform ecosystem that you can access. One of which I learned about. Take a moment for my Cloud Shell to open up here. A note on Cloud Shell. This is just a component of your AWS console. The cool thing about Cloud Shell is you can run 3 different types of bash here. You can run a Linux bash. There's a PowerShell bash, and then I'm actually blanking on what the third is. So what we have running here, this is a little Linux node that, just lets you run stuff from the CLI. So to just detail a little bit more about how deep Terraform is embedded in AWS. Oh, that's a bummer. It must. So there's this service called InfraCost, which is just a service which will tell you, let you simulate a deployment of AWS services using Terraform. So it'll take a Terraform playbook, run your Terraform playbook with InfraCost. It will simulate deployment of that service and basically tell you how much it costs. So Terraform is absolutely the standard. If you're interested in learning any infrastructure as code, I would recommend starting there. Okay. So this is one that I heard a lot of people talk about sort of nervously, which is eventually AWS is going to come for my service, right? If my service is successful, AWS knows because they run the marketplace. And just like Amazon will eventually come for any physical thing and Amazon Essentials will start making it, services are AWS is eventually going to pick up on any really successful service and add it to their platform. That being said, there's a big time frame where if you generate something novel on AWS, you can have access to, what is it, 70% of the internet is on AWS. So there's a huge opportunity to use their marketplace and their platform to accelerate your services, accelerate your business. And then this was, if I had to say there was one theme, it was AWS announcing that they have taken a new service, Serverless. They do not want to have applications that are running on servers. They do not want, and don't get me wrong, they still offer a lot of these programs that actually run on Metal, right? But what they really want, what AWS wants, what their business model is they want to take your data, they want to manage everything on the back end, and they tell you that the benefit is you're only going to pay for what you use. But I'm really interested in getting deeper into the economic side of it when, there is the economy of scale, which says because they're doing this so much, they can do it less expensively. But on the other side, there also has to be a level where if you are able to manage your own systems, design good systems, have them run well, then eventually the costs associated with managing their services, 'cause that's what AWS wants to turn all of their services into. They want all of these to be managed services. Eventually, that cost of management, I'm just really interested to see how that cost of management compares to the cost of sort of maintaining your own thing. That being said, the point here is 100 new applications went serverless. I might be exaggerating a little bit there, but even EMR has a serverless option now. And EMR is probably one of the most pivotal services that AWS offers. It has a serverless option. All of their higher level stuff like SageMaker. SageMaker is a machine learning model. Their machine learning model has serverless options. And it's AWS wants to manage the infrastructure of your business. Whatever components those might be, whatever services your business might need, Amazon wants to have them on their servers and to manage them on their own servers. One of the more interesting conversations I had over the course of the week was about Kubernetes. So we've used Kubernetes at Anant, and some people at Anant love it, and some people think it's a little bit overcomplicated. But for every 2 people that liked it, that thought it was the future, there was one person who had been working in code a long time that just thought it was too much, that just thought it was too complex, the learning curve was too high. Why is it this complicated? And why is the documentation so bad? It really divided the community. And so it got to be a sort of fun point to ask people, what do you think about Kubernetes? Because everybody had opinions. The last thing I want to talk about today is the partner network. That's something that is sort of the AWS Marketplace of services. There are over 100,000 vendors at this point. The minimum requirements for a partnership, for being a partner, are extremely low. I believe the lowest level of partnership just requires essentially a bank account, right? And you can host services or SaaS products on the AWS Marketplace. There's a lot more that I could discuss here about specific SaaS products. There are at least 2 different methods for hosting a SaaS product. You can sell your SaaS and have somebody download it onto their infrastructure. AWS will, register the download and pay you. Or you can host your SaaS product on your infrastructure and you report to AWS how much the SaaS product is being used. And that sort of flexibility is interesting. It gives you the option, again, to be the manager of services, which is something that AWS seems to think is a good idea, a good business venture. So I think there's probably something there. As you get more serious, as you start dealing with bigger clients, there are a lot of tiers of AWS partnerships and they start with, do you have people that are certified on our AWS certifications? And then it quickly becomes, how many people do you have that are certified on our certifications? And do you have high-level certifications in addition to this sort of basic stuff? So our CEO, Rahul, went to the partner keynote, and one of the things that he heard was the head of the AWS Marketplace saying, we have so much business and so many partners, but actually making the connections between those is still an open problem, right? This sort of matchmaking, it's a little bit of the Angie's List problem. This is still a real problem in business. The good news is AWS has so many business and so many partners because people are making money on the partner network. And it's really an opportunity to grow your business, to grow your reach, and to sort of take advantage of all of the marketing that other people have done, that AWS has done, to sort of pitch yourself and your services on this business. So I believe that's all I wanted to discuss today. Thank you for listening to my talk. If you have questions about the conference or about any of the specific services I discussed or announcements that I discussed, I'm happy to field those. Thank you so much for your time. Akwi, do we have any questions on the YouTube chat?
We do. So the first one is, are there any intentions about decommissioning AWS Glue now that EMR serverless is out? And the follow-up, was there any mention of the use of one versus the other?
Yeah, so Glue's not going anywhere. I did not hear anything about Glue going anywhere, and it was absolutely still a component of a couple of the labs that I did. And a lot of the reference architectures that I saw. So I don't think you would need to worry about Glue going anywhere. So I'm not that deeply invested into Glue, but my understanding is essentially that EMR is really catering towards open source, and Glue is a little bit more oriented towards people that are really deeply bought into the AWS ecosystem and just want to keep using these managed AWS services. Does that answer your question?
I believe so. Let's give them one more second, see if we get any more questions. In the meantime, just a few announcements as we close out. Friendly reminder, please do download our latest run book. That will be going out soon. That will stop being available soon. There's a link in the chat. Rehab did confirm. He said, yeah, that did answer his question. Thanks for that. But yeah, please grab your copy of our run book. We have a Cassandra lunch coming up this Thursday at noon. So we hope if you're available, you could join us there as well. Also, do subscribe to the channel. So whenever we go live with any of our events, you get that notification directly. Nick, I'd like to thank you for another great presentation. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us this afternoon. And we'll see everyone at the same time, same place next week. Thanks, everyone. Have a good afternoon and a good week.
Thanks, Ekwe. Bye, everyone.
All right, so we are off.